I'm Brittany.
And I'm Heather.
Welcome to Okayest Moms, the podcast.
A place to be more than just mom.
Our guest today is Michelle Icard. She is the author of 8 Setbacks That Can Make a Child a Success, a new book that is out now and available for you. And perfect timing, right?
Perfect timing. We have had kind of a rough transition to middle school. And I mean, with protecting his privacy a little bit. I can just talk about it from my perspective. And it's just very hard to watch your kid walk into this big new place and know that you have like no control or you have no way of like helping them through it at all. And I think like the first day of school when we dropped him off, I like went against all the urges in my body to like walk him to his first class. Because one, he didn't want that, but two, nobody else was doing that. And he hopped out of the car and he, like, you could see the look on his face and he was just overwhelmed and scared, but he knew what he had to do and he did it. And I just like that feeling of, I don't know, throwing your kid to the wolves essentially is just not easy. So all of that being said, this episode came at the exact right time for me personally.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, give yourself some credit there. You didn't throw him to the wall. You did as much as you could to prepare. You went and walked to campus. You did all those things. He went to orientation. Like, it's not like at some point you have to trust that you've done all you can, that he is responsible and capable, and that this is all just it's all part of the experience.
All part of growing up, right?
Yeah.
That's, reminders I have to constantly give myself because, it never quite feels like I do enough, even if like in my head, I know that's not true. So,
yeah, but I mean, he's at the age now where a lot of this can be transitioned over to him. I mean, you can't do it all. At some point, you got to give him the ball and see what he can do with it.
Yeah, well, it's true.
All right, let's take a break and we will be back with Michelle.
Hi, Michelle. Welcome to our show.
Hey, thanks for having me here.
Can you tell us and our audience a little bit about yourself and the work you do?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I am 50 and I have been doing this work for 20 years. I started when my kids were 2 and 4, and they are now 21 and 23. So this has been sort of the majority of my adult life, and my life as a parent has been focused on helping other parents help their kids through adolescence. So that's a mouthful, but I have a background in education. I love to write, and I was really interested in the social changes that start to happen when kids enter adolescence. So when my kids were teeny tiny, I started a leadership program for kids in middle school, and it was really focused on how do you help kids figure out who they are in their social scene. So all of these changes are happening, and how do you help them deal with toxic friendships and feeling excluded, or any of that kind of stuff that happens. And in the past 20 years, those little programs have grown into writing books and leading conferences and lots of outreach to parents and teachers in that way.
I'm going to sidetrack this really quickly for a brief moment. Have you noticed that those social changes are coming earlier and earlier in kids since you've been in the field for so long? Because as you were mentioning those, so I teach 3rd grade, and you were mentioning just like how the kids are kind of still finding their place. I associate that with middle school because that was kind of how it happened for me. But I'm noticing that so much more in these younger kids, and kind of like the mean girlness is coming out, and the boys don't know how to handle their emotions and their interactions with each other. And I just noticed that jockeying so much earlier than I remember.
Yeah, I think that's really astute. I think part of it is that we may not remember the early stuff as well, but I do think factually that it's happening earlier. And I mean, we know that a lot of things like puberty are happening earlier. And so we know that there's a rise in that, but socially kids are starting to sort of position themselves and think about things more analytically, even at an early age. Like, what is the group I belong to and where do I fit in? And we didn't used to think that that kind of identity development happened that young, but I am with you. It's starting sooner than it ever was, especially for us.
Yeah. So many times I'm like, whoa, how are we talking about this here right now?
But go play Little House on the Prairie. Like,
Right. Exactly. So you recently wrote a book, 8 Setbacks That Can Make Your Child a Success. So tell us a little bit about it and how it came to be.
Sure. Well, to your point, the first thing I'll mention is this is my first book for kids ages 8 to 18. So it is the full span of sort of adolescence coming in at its very earliest point. And what it's about are the ways in which kids screw up, faceplant, have setbacks, have failures all throughout, late elementary, middle, and high school, and how parents can react to that so that those failures don't become the headline of their childhood, but they're sort of a launching pad for growth. I am a big believer that we all should screw up a ton because we learn from that. We learn where our boundaries are. We learn where our interests lie. We learn, how not to hurt people and how not to hurt ourselves. And all of that good stuff comes out of screwing up. So I really wanted to write a book that would embrace that would encourage parents to crack the code of silence around that. We're in a very perfectionist era right now. And so I wanted to encourage parents to say, you know what? Yeah, we're going through a hard time right now. You don't have to give out all of your kids' private information, but to acknowledge that we're all struggling in some way or another, and that that's a good thing because that's how we learn.
I love that so much. I can't wait to read it. As parents, we all know our children make mistakes. Why is our response to their mistakes important?
I love that question because we sort of feel like when a kid makes a mistake, they need to own it and fix it, and that we don't have a role in sort of helping them through that. I do want it to be their mistake. I want their stories to be told by them. It's not our job to say, oh, my kid sent a nude and blast that out on a parenting Facebook group or whatever it might be, right? That's their story to tell. But we do play a role in helping them learn from that and grow from that as sort of a teacher and a coach. So some of the most important things that we can do are check ourselves, make sure that our fears and worries about that aren't spiraling out of control. That's a big job that we have as parents, is to sort of reel our own emotions back in so that we're not compounding our kids' emotions with what we are worried about on top of that. So that's first and foremost one of the most important things that we can do. And then helping kids sort of shed a veil of shame around messing up, normalizing that that's what they're supposed to do in order to learn, and helping them focus on what they can get out of a situation instead of, oh no, this is going to destroy me. So there are a lot of tips in the book on what you can do and what you can say when that happens so that your kid doesn't start to spiral.
That's such a hard part of raising older kids, is that you don't want to air their dirty laundry too much, but also I need to talk about this. I need to work through it so I can help them work through it. And it's so hard because you don't want to give too much away. You don't want other people to use that information against them or have that alter their opinion of them.
That's right. You have to be a little bit of a PR manager with your kid in this sense. So in the book, I refer to something as the Whisper Network. And there are parents out there who want nothing more than to usher you along to the parent who can help you, to the service that you need, to the provider who will really understand your child. And you kind of have to, rather than do a big broadcast, you've got to find the right person who can put you in touch with the right person. And once you open up to 2 or 3 trusted friends or resources, you're going to find that parents want to take you by the hand and take you where you need to be. So it doesn't have to be a public broadcast, but you do need to not keep it just within the walls of your living room, because then you're not going to get the help you need. And every parent I interviewed for this book said the moment they started feeling better was the moment they talked to someone.
Yeah, that's honestly, I think I can speak for Heather too, our struggle with this podcast, because it's kind of our therapy to, talk about things, but obviously this goes out to the world. So we can't,
Right.
we're having to juggle that um, juggle those balls of like how much is too much to share, how much. And honestly, I've been asking my kids because I have an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old. And if they're okay with me sharing, then I will mostly. But if they say no, then it doesn't get shared.
I love that. I have the same policy. There are 8 teen archetypes in this book, and each one represents a different, really common way that kids kind of screw up. So there's endangering your body, doing something really reckless. That could be drinking too much. That could be taking a dumb dare and jumping off of something too high, any of those things. Or it could be, for example, failure to connect with your peers or an inability to get along with your family. So there are 8 different types of these. One of them is my kid. So one of them is a failure that we went through. And my child gave me permission. They were like, you can use my name. I'm past this. I don't care. I want other people to learn from it. But I was like, even though you're a young adult, I still want you to be the teller of your story. Every one of these has been anonymized. I'm in here, and lots of other parents are in here too. But I just felt like they should, if they want to share it, great. That should be done on their own terms. And if I'm sharing it, I ask for permission, just like you do. And if it's something little and they say, yes, I do. But if it's a big deal thing, then I say, that's yours to share when you're ready. I'm not going to do it on your behalf.
So let's say you haven't reacted quite so well to a child's mistake in the past. How can you kind of rebuild that trust so that they do confide in you again?
That's a great question. And I think rebuilding trust has to happen both ways. Sometimes we need it from our kids when they've really screwed up, and sometimes they need it from us when we've screwed up. And so either direction, I think being honest and transparent and vulnerable is always the first step. So I've had time to think about it. I'm disappointed in the way I reacted. I shouldn't have done that. And to come at it with a sense of, I'd like a redo if you're willing to give me one. I want to think about how I want to react to that instead of just impulsively doing that. And that's key because throughout adolescence, not just up to 18, but into their 20s, kids are so impulsive. They're thinking with the amygdala, that sort of emotional center of their brain, and that brain loves action, and it doesn't like to stop and pause and think critically. So if you can model that and they can begin to know how to do that because they see you do it, they have a leg up as they're going through adolescence to be able to say, oh, it's okay for me to say, I don't have the answer right now. I'm going to come back to that. They can say that to their friends. They can think that to themselves when they're faced with a problem. So I think being able to say that for them is a really good way of modeling how to slow down that fast-paced, impulsive thinking. That's always the first step.
How do we know when to let a mistake we see coming happen? And do we intervene? I mean, aside from the actual safety part of it, but what would you do if you saw one coming?
Right. I write about this in the book because this is a really common question that parents have. Like, on the one hand, it's my job to keep my kids safe and it's my job to protect them. And so I ought to be doing that. And on the other hand, if I wrap my kid in bubble wrap and they don't have experiences that they can learn from, they're not going to grow. So you'll have to figure out where that sweet spot is that you're willing to let them get comfortable with enough discomfort that it teaches them a lesson. This is how failure works in teaching us something. If you experience so much pain that it's traumatic, you don't learn. You shut down. If you experience life in a sort of perfect universe where you're never challenged and you're catered to, you never learn. So you have to have that middle spot where you're experiencing enough discomfort that you can grow from it. It's so much like exercise, really, right? Like, you have to have enough pain that you can grow, not so much that you tear. Right? So what should a parent do in that case? And the way I think of it is if they're facing imminent harm, you need to step in. So in the same way that if you're outside and you notice that there's broken glass where your kids play basketball, you're not going to be like, good time for them to learn to look before they play, right? You're going to let them get stitches, obviously, and get hurt, imminent harm. You must intervene when you see that coming. But if it's kind of slow awareness that they're developing, I think it's really good to let that happen mostly on its own. And your job can be to ask some questions. Like, make an observation. I've noticed you're feeling this way. I've noticed a few of these things happening. How are you feeling about that? Or what are you thinking about that? And that gives them time to, again, pause that impulsive brain and start to process what they're going through.
I love that.
So, as a parent, especially of older kids, as my kids are getting older, I'm finding this kind of like tug of war inside of, do I be like their cheerleader who's like, yeah, that person does suck, they shouldn't have done that to you? Or is it more my role to help them build that different perspective of like, well, you did kind of mess up there. So like, at what point is, I don't want to be overly critical of them, but also I do want to build that empathy and that perspective taking, but also like, it's my kids. So of course I want to protect them and support them. So how do you find the balance between those two different calls?
Yeah. When my daughter, this is a story I can share about my daughter.
I was going to say, this is such a mother-daughter dynamic.
Oh, yes. So when she was in 6th grade, she's now 23. So this is way in her fat. She was going through the very typical sort of girl stuff that happens early in middle school where friendship groups are shifting. And she was complaining to me one night about a friend before bedtime, which is, of course, when this happens, And so she's going on. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, but that girl's got a lot going on. Like, I know what's happening in her family. I know some background stuff. And I want to kind of advocate for my daughter to have a little empathy for this other person, right? So I do that for a minute, and I could see her just get defeated. And she said, you never just like feel bad for me. And I was like, oh, damn, I am always looking for the teachable moment, aren't I? But I do, right? So I was really struck by that. And I thought, sometimes when we're complaining to someone about what's going on, all we want is for the other person to be like, that stinks. That, can I make you a snack? If I'm telling my husband, like, I was late for a meeting, I got the time all wrong. If he's like, well, why don't you set your calendar to blah, 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 I'm so annoyed. I want him to say, oh, do you want me to get you a glass of wine? And like, you can tell me all about it. So I think that's the main thing that our kids want. They want to know that you are a safe spot to just land with all of their junk. And once they get it out of their brains, they usually feel a lot better about it. I think you can also say, do you want me just to listen? Or would you like me to give you some advice on how to handle this? And when they're given that opportunity, I mean, a lot of times they'll say, listen, but sometimes they'll say, I really do want your advice. But if you don't ask for permission first, they never want your advice, right? So I think getting the buy-in is key. And then I think the more you established that foundation of I am a safe place, sort of for you to dump all of this stuff, then the more they're going to naturally seek out your guidance. So you'll get those opportunities.
Yeah, one came up recently with my daughter. There's a neighborhood kid who, whenever they play together, there's just always a conflict. And like you said in your example, there's a lot going on at home. And so I was trying to explain to her, like, this is why he acts this way. And she kind of just stopped and was like, well, that doesn't make it okay. And I was like, no, you're right. It totally doesn't. It doesn't justify anything he's doing. I'm just trying to give you the background of why I think he's acting this way so that you can, kind of bob and weave a little bit better with it. And she was just like, well, why? That doesn't make any sense. I'm like, well, you do that too. So, but it was a fun moment of like watching this like different part of cognition happen. I was like, and I kind of had this moment of like, am I defending this other kid too much? Because like, he is a jerk. Like, also like, everybody's a jerk for a reason, right? So it was a hard moment for me of like, do I help her understand why, or do I just like defend her? Because he is kind of a dick.
Yes. Yes. Some kids are. All kids are.
Right.
Some kids
Totally.
are. Right. And so I think, another thing that you can probably do is just say, what do you think you want to do about that? And I love when parents get their kids brainstorming how to solve their own problems because they're pretty terrible at it. And a lot of times that impulsive part of the brain answers the question first. So they're like, well, I'm going to tell him to shut up, or I'm going to kick him next time he does this. And so you can just be like, yeah, that's one thing you could do. What's another? And their best ideas are usually 5 or 6 deep. So if you cannot write off the first one as horrible and get to that 5th or 6th idea, then usually they come to terms with this one makes more sense. than the first one I had.
So I'm going to go off course a little bit. I have a kiddo who will be going into middle school in 2 weeks, and he tends to be more negative about things. So like when we do that brainstorming things, he's like, no, we can do nothing. Everything's terrible. What are some strategies I could use to maybe help him be better with that brainstorming?
One that I think works really well for kids like that is to say, what's the worst thing you could do? So let's not even try to solve this for the best. Let's try to figure out how to avoid the worst. So he's good at this, right? Yeah. So, like, tell me, what is the very worst thing you could do in this situation? What would make this blow up? And then he can probably think of what that is. So that might be getting into a physical fight. That might be spreading a rumor. That might, who knows? But I would get him on that track first before you try to go to what's the best thing we can do? Because that is daunting for kids, especially new problem solvers. So I think it's really typical. And I try to just get them thinking about the worst case scenario. It's kind of fun. It can be funny if it gets really weird. And that can just sort of loosen up that part of their brain that wants to check what they're saying every time and say, that's dumb. That's not going to work.
I love that. Putting it on my list of strategies.
Right.
Okay, so all of this only works if the groundwork has been laid for these conversations with our tweens and teens. What are some things parents can do to help kids open up and come talk to us?
So there are a ton of these, and I think of them as sort of conversation starters and conversation crashers. So things that you can do are offer choices. So just the way with little teeny kids, you'd say, like, do you want to wear your red shirt or your blue shirt? And you made it real simple to give them a piece of ownership and control. We need to be doing that with our kids' time. So as kids enter adolescence, they're having a tough time with multitasking. And so when you say, hey, we need to talk about X, they can feel caught off guard, unprepared. You've had time to think about it and you know what you want to say, and they haven't. And that feels almost like an attack to them when you don't feel like it's an attack. You feel like it's an invitation. So I would say something like, hey, I'd like to talk about whatever, grades, your friend, how you're feeling, whatever it is. Do you want to talk after dinner maybe for a few minutes, or would you rather that I meet you for breakfast? Like just for a quick 10 minutes and put a time limit on it so they know it's not going to go on forever. Giving a choice is a great one. And then I think keeping your emotions out of it, being neutral, that is so hard to do. But your child's brain is amped up with extra emotion at this stage of life, so they don't need yours on top of it. I can remember having real friendship issues in middle school and not telling my mom about it because I was like, my mom is going to be so hurt to know that I'm hurt. She wasn't a safe person for me to tell. My mom was a lovely, loving person, but also super emotional when it came to me. And so I knew I couldn't talk to her about the things that were hurting me because it would hurt her, and I didn't want to put that on her. So you've got to figure out how to kind of clear out that emotional stuff.
Okay, well, I feel attacked, but it's fine. That's definitely something I need to work on.
We all do because we love our kids so much. But yeah, it's a tough
Well,
one.
and partly it's that they choose like the worst times to come and tell us these kinds of things too. It's always like, it's like, read the room. I'm happy to help, but not like in the middle of like cooking dinner.
That's right. Well, and they do that for a reason, because when you're distracted, they presume you're not going to be super emotional, right? Like you've got something else that you're doing. They're not going to like cue into them with all of the force of your full eye contact and you like that. But yeah, it's annoying. It's right as you're starting to fall asleep. It's right as you are texting a friend something really juicy. Right? You're like, can't I have anything for me? Trying to gossip. Oh, yeah.
Okay, so one thing that we've seen on Instagram is the Botox brow. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, I'd love to. Okay, so Botox brow is my way of illustrating what we were talking about. There was this very cool study that came out of McLean Hospital, which is one of Harvard's teaching hospitals, and a neurologist, Deborah Yergel Todd, for any of you who like to Google. That's going to be a tough one to spell, but you can find it on my Instagram. She put adults through an MRI, and she showed them pictures of people's faces. And she said, just by looking at this person's face, can you tell me how they're feeling? And it was a really super small study group, but this is panned out neurologically, broader than this tiny study. the adults in her study could tell by looking at people's faces whether they were feeling basic emotions of joy or anger or sadness, those kinds of things, correctly about 100% of the time. And she could tell, because they were hooked up to an MRI, that they were using their prefrontal cortex to read people's facial expressions. Then she put teens through, showed them the same photos, and said, can you tell me how these people are feeling just by looking at them? And the teens had a really tough time with this. So they got it right half the time. And again, hooked up to an MRI, she could tell that they were using the amygdala, the central part of the brain. They don't start pulling on the prefrontal cortex to read facial expressions until late teen years, sort of end of adolescence, early 20s. So they really are kind of handicapped at reading what we're feeling just by looking at us. And when we scrunch up our forehead and talk to our kids and sort of like you get that deep 11 in between your eyes, they read that as anger. So I make that face when I'm concentrating. I make that face sometimes when I'm relaxing. I make that face if the sun's in my eyes or if I'm trying to remember to send a work email, but oh, I forgot I wanted to ask you how that math test was that you were stressing about. And so if I make that crinkled up face, my kid is going to see me and assume anger. And so if I say, oh, hey, how was that math test? And my brow is furrowed, my kid might be like, why are you mad? We haven't even got our grades. And they stomp off. And I thought I was being nice and asking how their math test was. So Botox brow, I want parents to pretend they are a celebrity on a late night talk show who has been so clearly over Botoxed, they cannot their forehead. And it takes a lot of practice, but is a huge payoff. If you can keep your forehead neutral and kind of unscrunched while you're talking to your kids, they are not likely to read you as angry when you're not. So you're not going to have a miscommunication. And like I said at the beginning, I've been doing this for about 20 years. This is the one tip parents come back to me over and over again saying, what a game changer. My kid's really opening up to me more.
So cool. I love it. I'm going to use
I mean, just go get the Botox.
And also you can get the Botox. That's fine too.
another reason I should do it. Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell our audience where they can find you and where they can order the book?
I'd love to. So the book is called 8 Setbacks That Can Make Your Child a Success, and you can order it anywhere. You can get it from Amazon. You can go into your local indie shop, Barnes & Noble, wherever you get your books from. Please grab a copy. Find me on Instagram. I love Instagram, and I do post daily, and they're a great way to get little free nuggets of advice and also lots of humor. So that's just my name, Michelle with 2 L's, and then Icard, which looks like Icard.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks for having me.
If you like what you just heard, and we hope you do, you can find more of us online at www.okayestmoms.com. We're also on all social media platforms, Pinterest, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at Okayest Moms Blog. Or if you want to, you can send us an email at hey@okayestmoms.com.